Welcome to Mystery Cafe, your ultimate stop for gripping detective stories, chilling mysteries, and unforgettable investigations. Here, every video serves a fresh dose of suspense, shocking twists, and cases that challenge your inner detective. From classic whodunits to modern crime stories, we bring the world of mystery straight to your screen, where every clue matters and no secret stays buried for long. Before we start unraveling today's mystery, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. Drop your country, city, or stay in the comments, and let's see how far the Mystery Cafe family reaches. Magnifying glass tilted right.
The Velvet Threat. Chapter 1, A Client with Silk Gloves. If you've never seen a silk glove tremble, you've missed one of life's smaller entertainments. The one I saw was doing a discreet shimmy on the hand of a lady who looked as if she could buy and sell Fifth Avenue for pocket change. Her name was Vivian Lake, and she was the kind of blonde that costs more than gold and tarnishes twice as fast. I'd barely opened the front door of the brownstone when she floated past me like an expensive scent commercial. Her perfume, something floral with a suggestion of trouble, drifted after her into Nero Wolfe's office, where my boss was sitting exactly as I'd left him, 1/4 of a ton of genius packed into a chair built to take it. Wolfe didn't bother looking up from the book he was punishing. I think it was Pliny the Elder, but it could have been a recipe for beef tongue. When you've worked for Wolfe as long as I have, you learn to tell the difference between his silence and his disapproval. This was silence. "Mr. Wolfe," I announced, "we have company. The kind that smells like money and problems." "Bring both in," he said without moving an eyelash. Vivian glided in, crossed her legs the way a fencing master crosses swords, and gave Wolfe a smile that could have been filed under strategic weapons. She laid a slim, salmon-colored envelope on his desk. "Someone wants $5,000, she said. "For a photograph. If I don't pay, the picture goes to my employer's wife, and to the gossip columns." I whistled low. "That's not much for keeping your reputation out of the evening edition. Inflation's hit even Blackmail." She ignored me and kept her gaze on Wolfe, who was now giving her the kind of slow visual once-over you usually reserve for a new breed of orchid. "Your employer?" he asked. "Mr. Brandon Roebuck. Roebuck Publications. Magazines, newspapers, the works." "Does Mr. Roebuck know you are here?" Her glove trembled just slightly. "No. He doesn't know about the note either. I handle his private correspondence, and certain delicate matters." This seemed delicate. Wolfe frowned at the envelope as if it might bite him. "And you wish me to identify or deter the extortionist?" "I wish you to make it go away," she said. "There are instructions. I'm to leave this envelope at a blue mailbox on West 49th Street tonight at 8. No police, no tricks. They'll know." Wolfe sighed. "They always do." He turned to me. "Archie, you will see that this delivery is made." "Sure," I said. "And if anyone starts shooting, do I duck before or after I get their license plate?" "Before, if you can manage it." He reached for his beer glass. "Miss Lake, you will leave the envelope here. I shall decide the most prudent course." She hesitated, then nodded, her perfume rippling through the air again. "I don't care how you do it, Mr. Wolfe. Just make sure that photo never sees daylight." When she left, I watched her through the front window as she disappeared into a taxi, leaving behind a faint shimmer of verbena and bad news. Wolfe was already back to his book. "So," I said. "A pretty woman, a blackmail note, a secret drop. You're interested? No, Wolfe said. But you are. Go. Return intact. I pocketed the envelope and looked at him. If anything happens to me, tell the police I died bravely. Archie, Wolfe said without looking up, if anything happens to you, I shall hire another assistant. That was Wolfe, affection wrapped in concrete. At 8 o'clock, I'd be standing in front of a rusted blue mailbox on West 49th with a salmon-colored envelope and a hunch that this case wasn't going to stay delicate for long. Chapter 2, The Drop and the Dead. By the time the clock struck 8, Manhattan had its night mask on, slick streets, neon eyelids, and the kind of drizzle that makes cab drivers philosophical. I was at the corner of West 49th and 9th Avenue, holding that salmon envelope like it was the last word in mystery. The blue mailbox was there, dented and listing like a drunk sailor, waiting for someone to slip it a secret. I took my time. No one hurries when Nero Wolfe is footing the bill. I scanned the block, 3 stores closed, 1 bar open, 1 suspicious shadow pretending to be part of a lamppost. I pretended to drop the envelope, fumbled it, and kept walking. The shadow twitched. I'd seen enough to know that whoever wrote the note wasn't working alone. I turned the corner, cut through the alley, and came up the back stair of a building that smelled like it remembered Prohibition fondly. 4th floor, apartment 4B, the return address on the envelope Wolfe had copied earlier. My knock got no answer, which I took as an invitation. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and immediately wished I hadn't. The first thing that hit me was the smell, stale smoke, bad whiskey, and the metallic tang of something that didn't belong. The second was the sight of a man lying face down on the floor. His shirt collar was dark where life had leaked out of him. A camera sat on the table beside an empty glass, the lens cap still on like a joke told too late. Leon Greaves. Photographer. Small time, but with a nose for other people's dirty laundry. I'd seen his byline on more scandal spreads than I care to count. I crouched beside him. No pulse, no chance. The envelope stayed in my pocket. The room had been searched, but carefully, drawers opened and closed, papers stacked too neatly. A pro's touch. Someone had been looking for something specific and left in a hurry. On the windowsill, a faint trace of perfume hung in the air, light, flowery, familiar. Verbena. The same fragrance Vivian Lake had brought into our office that afternoon. I was still thinking about that when the floorboards behind me creaked. "Stand up, Goodwin," growled a voice that could sand wood. Inspector Cramer. I didn't need to turn to know that mustache and temper anywhere. "Evening, Inspector," I said, getting up slow. "You're early. The party's over." He stepped around me, looked at the body, then looked at me like he was deciding which of us to arrest first. "You and Wolfe always show up where the corpses are still warm. You call this coincidence?" "I call it bad timing," I said. "Our client hired us to deliver an envelope here. Instead, I delivered myself to a homicide." Cramer grunted, which in his language meant "I don't believe you, but keep talking." He ordered a couple of uniforms to start canvassing. "What's in the envelope?" he asked. I shrugged. "Haven't opened it. Wolfe told me to deliver, not to snoop. He gets fussy about instructions." Cramer snorted. "That'll be the day. Who's your client?" I gave him the polite version: Vivian Lake, assistant to Brandon Roebuck, publisher, victim of blackmail. I left out the part about her trembling glove. He didn't like it. "Blackmail's a dirty game." Your boss better stay clean on this one. I smiled. Wolfe doesn't get dirty, Inspector. He delegates that to me. By the time I left, the place was crawling with cops, flashbulbs, and enough tension to light the Chrysler building. I went straight back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in his chair, a book in one hand and beer in the other. The orchids upstairs had more motion. Well? He asked without looking up. Your delivery boy found a corpse, I said. Leon Greaves. Photographer. Skull bashed in. Smelled like verbena. Cramer's in charge. That got him to lift an eyebrow. Verbena again. Curious. I thought so. The same scent as Miss Lake's. Makes me wonder if she left anything behind besides perfume. Wolfe set his beer down and closed the book. Archie, I detest conjecture, but I detest coincidence even more. Miss Lake will return tomorrow at 11. Until then, do nothing rash. Rash is my middle name, I said. He gave me the look that means I'd said something witty but unhelpful. Pfui. Attend to your notes. There is order in filth only when recorded. I went to my desk and started typing, while Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes, looking like a mountain taking a nap. Somewhere between the click of my keys and the faint hum from the orchids upstairs, I got the feeling that whatever was in that salmon envelope had just turned into something a lot bloodier. And the next move, whether Wolfe liked it or not, was going to be mine. Chapter 3, The Lady and the Publisher. Morning came the usual way, coffee from Fritz, complaints from Wolfe, and a newspaper headline that refused to be ignored. Photographer slain in Midtown apartment, blackmail angle suspected. You didn't need a magnifying glass to know our names would show up before lunch. I was halfway through my eggs when the phone rang. Wolfe hates phones the way some men hate dentists, so I answered. Goodwin here. Miss Lake, said a voice that could have been carved from frost. I read the papers. Then you know your photographer's developed his last role, I said. I need to see you. Both of you. Wolfe doesn't do field calls before noon. I'm coming there, she said. In 20 minutes. I hung up and gave Wolfe the news. He muttered something in Latin that didn't sound complimentary and reached for another beer. By the time Vivian Lake arrived, the brownstone was already bracing for her entrance. She looked different, colder, sharper, like she'd spent the night making friends with guilt. The gloves were gone, her hands were steady now, which somehow made her more dangerous. You didn't tell me he'd end up dead, she said. Miss Lake, Wolfe replied, I rarely predict murder. It cheapens the surprise. She gave him a look that could slice fruit. What happens now? Now, Wolfe said, you tell me everything you omitted yesterday. She hesitated, then exhaled like someone shedding manners. Leon Greaves took a photograph 6 weeks ago, an accident, he claimed. It shows Mrs. Roebuck in an unfortunate position. With a man who isn't her husband. Name of the other Romeo? I asked. I don't know. The image was blurred. But Greaves wanted $5,000 to destroy the negative. I tried to handle it quietly. Without alerting your boss. Yes. Wolfe's eyes closed, not from fatigue but from disgust. And now the photographer is dead. The photograph, missing. The police will connect these events, as even they sometimes do. She leaned forward, desperate but composed. Mr. Wolfe, please. Find that photo. If the wrong people get it, Mr. Roebuck's empire collapses. And so do I. He studied her for a full 30 seconds. You're loyal, he said finally. Dangerously so. Archie, accompany Miss Lake to Mr. Roebuck's office. Observe. Listen. Report. That was my cue. 15 minutes later, I was in a cab beside a woman who looked like she could outstare a firing squad. Roebuck Publications took up half a block on Madison Avenue, and the lobby looked like it printed its own money. We rode the elevator in silence. When we stepped out, Brandon Roebuck himself was waiting, a tall, polished man with iron gray hair and the kind of tan that comes from executive lighting. "Vivian," he said, surprised. "I didn't expect." "This is Mr. Goodwin," she cut in. "He's assisting on a private matter." Roebuck's eyes flicked to me, measuring, then settled on Charm. "Anything concerning my staff is my concern." "Even when your staff's being blackmailed?" I asked. He stiffened. "Blackmailed?" Vivian's tone softened. "It's under control, Brandon. Please trust me." Trust her, maybe. Believe her, not so much. Roebuck gestured us into his office, a cathedral of walnut, glass, and authority. He poured coffee as if pouring confessions. "Leon Greaves," I said, "was the blackmailer. He's dead." Roebuck's hand froze mid-pour. "Dead?" "Very. Skull crushed." "You knew him?" "Barely. He did freelance work for one of our magazines. If he was blackmailing anyone, I hope the police find who killed him." He said it like a man rehearsing innocence for a jury. When we left, Vivian looked ready to collapse but too proud to admit it. Outside, I hailed a cab. "You believe him?" I asked. She didn't answer, just stared out the window at the traffic like it was a puzzle with one missing piece. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was entertaining orchids. He glanced at me, saw my face, and grunted. "Your report?" Roebuck plays the innocent. His wife plays mysterious. Vivian plays loyal. The dead man played himself out. Everyone's in costume except us. He nodded. "Then act accordingly. Tomorrow, you will call on Mrs. Roebuck. Observe her house, her tone, and her scent. Verbena?" He smiled faintly. "If it is, we'll be one step nearer the truth. If it isn't, we'll be 2 steps behind a liar." That's Wolfe's way, half philosophy, half insult, and all business. I didn't know it then, but by the time I knocked on Mrs. Roebuck's door, I'd be 1 step away from another corpse, and a very expensive lie. Chapter 4, The Woman in Verbena. Celine Roebuck answered her own door, which told me 2 things right away. She didn't trust servants, and she wanted to control the first impression. It worked. She was about 40, elegant enough to make restraint look expensive, with eyes like polished steel and a smile you could cut paper with. The perfume that drifted out behind her was unmistakable, verbena, the same scent that hung in the air around Leon Greaves's body. "Mr. Goodwin, isn't it?" she said, with that cool calm some women use instead of honesty. "My husband told me you're working on something that concerns us." "That's the rumor," I said, following her into a living room that could have been featured in her husband's magazines, wide sofas, long shadows, and a fireplace pretending to be friendly. "I'm hoping to ask a few harmless questions." "I don't believe questions are ever harmless, Mr. Goodwin." She sat down and gestured toward a chair, like a queen inviting a peasant to dine. "I'll risk it," I said, and took out my notebook. You knew Leon Greaves? Her lashes flickered once. Only by reputation. He photographed a charity gala last spring. I was one of many faces in his lens. Must have been some lens. Someone thought that picture was worth blackmail. Her lips parted slightly. You're implying, what exactly? That someone had a photo showing you with a man who isn't your husband. That got a pause long enough to count to 10. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but sharp. Rumors are a cheap currency, Mr. Goodwin. Spend them elsewhere. I leaned back. Ma'am, Nero Wolfe doesn't deal in rumors. He deals in facts. One of them's dead, and his name was Greaves. For a fraction of a second, her hand tightened around the armrest. Then she smiled again, thin, brittle, deliberate. That's tragic. But you're wasting your time if you think I'm involved. Now, if that's all. Almost. Do you grow orchids, Mrs. Roebuck? The question caught her sideways. My husband does, she said. A small greenhouse on the roof. He finds them soothing. I nodded as if that were normal. They're lovely plants. Rare ones leave a trace, spores, moss, bits of soil. Sometimes it gets under the nails. Her eyes met mine, hard and unflinching. Are you here to accuse me of gardening, Mr. Goodwin? No, ma'am, I said, standing. Just curious about who's been cultivating trouble. I left her staring after me, that verbena scent trailing me to the elevator like a signature. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was half buried in an armchair with a beer and a look of infinite disinterest. He opened one eye when I came in. You've been among orchids again, he said. And murder perfume, I told him. Mrs. Roebuck smells like our corpse's last breath. Claims she barely knew the man. Acts like she's rehearsing for an alibi she hasn't needed yet. Wolfe puffed his cheeks. Verbena, he said. Curious plant, pleasant but insistent. It lingers, like guilt. I handed him my notes. She admits the orchids belong to her husband. But her hands were too clean for a woman married to a gardener. He nodded slowly. Then either she didn't touch the plants, or she washed away what she didn't want seen. Archie, you will visit the greenhouse. I wish to know if the moss used there contains sphagnum, the sort that clings to suede. Planning to start a floral investigation? I asked. He ignored me and reached for the phone. Call Miss Lake, he said. Tell her the situation is no longer delicate. It's become odorous. 2 hours later, I was in the Roebuck building again, this time with a key Miss Lake had borrowed from the maintenance desk and a story about checking fire alarms. The elevator opened onto the rooftop conservatory, humid air, soft light, and a wall of orchids in every shade that money and obsession could buy. The place was a paradise for bees and blackmailers alike. On a work table sat a pair of suede gloves, the same make and size as the one Wolfe had in his desk drawer, the one that had come from Greaves's apartment. I picked them up carefully, using a pencil, and saw faint green fibers clinging to the seams. Moss. I was still studying them when a voice behind me said, admiring my wife's orchids, Mr. Goodwin? Brandon Roebuck stood in the doorway, tall and calm, but with the kind of tension that doesn't stay bottled long. They're impressive, I said. Fragile, though. One wrong move and the beauty's gone. He stepped forward, folding his arms. I don't appreciate intrusions. Then you'll hate what comes next, I said. Your photographer's dead, your wife's in the middle, and the smell of her perfumes turning up in all the wrong rooms. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile a lawyer wears before objecting. "You're out of line, Mr. Goodwin." "Maybe. But I'm rarely wrong." I left him there among the orchids, looking like a man rehearsing innocence. On the way down, I decided Wolfe wasn't going to like this. There were too many scents in the air: verbena, moss, and money. Back home, I reported everything. Wolfe listened without interrupting, which is his version of applause. When I finished, he said, "We have 2 women who lie well, 1 husband who lies better, and a corpse who told no lies at all. Proceed carefully, Archie. The next mistake will not be Greaves's." Chapter 5, The Printer's Secret. Wolfe didn't need to say it twice. By the time he finished his 3rd bottle of beer, I was halfway to Midtown, following a lead that smelled like ink, paper, and trouble. The printer's name was Alvin Croker, a lean man with nicotine fingers and a face that looked like it had been pressed too close to a mimeograph. His shop crouched between a pawn shop and a diner on 42nd Street, its sign half burned out. When I walked in, the air was thick with the perfume of solvents and cheap ambition. Croker glanced up from a cutter machine and gave me the kind of look you reserve for tax collectors and ex-wives. "You Croker?" I asked. "Depends who's asking." "Archie Goodwin. I'm working on behalf of Nero Wolfe." He blinked. "The big orchid guy? What's he want with printing?" "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." "You do rush jobs for Roebuck Publications?" "Sure. Flyers, proofs, catalogs." "Why?" "Because Leon Greaves got killed 2 nights ago, and your name showed up next to his on a billing sheet. That got him." He wiped his hands on a rag, trying to keep his voice casual. "He brought in a negative last week. Said it was for an exhibit program. Wanted a single 8x10 print, cash, no receipt." "What did it show?" Croker's eyes darted to the back door. "Didn't look close." "Not my business." "I'm making it your business," I said, leaning on the counter. "The woman who paid for that print might be your next customer, or your next problem." He swallowed. "All I know is she came back yesterday. Real sharp lady. Gloves, glasses, perfume you could smell in Jersey. Paid double to make sure there were no copies left." "Describe her." "Tall. Blonde. Could have been that movie star from The Glass Key." That description fit Vivian Lake like a custom dress. "Thanks," I said, and dropped a bill on the counter. "Buy yourself some fresh air." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was elbow-deep in an argument with gravity. He scowled when I reported. "So," he said, "Miss Lake purchased the print after the photographer's death." "Right after. Either she wanted to bury evidence or resurrect it." "Pfui. Both are forms of vanity." He drummed his fingers, which for Wolfe counts as excitement. "The perfume again?" "Same note, verbena." He nodded. "We are orbiting a scent rather than a fact." "I dislike that." "Then how about a fact?" I said. The same oversized paperclips Croker uses turned up at Roebuck's office. And Greaves's desk had one twisted into a figure 8, like he was fidgeting when someone clocked him. Wolfe's eyes half closed. "You think he was nervous?" "I think he was waiting for company." He stood, a rare event and therefore newsworthy, and waddled toward the globe that hides his liquor. "Archie, the essence of deduction is elimination. Miss Lake lies from loyalty, Mrs. Roebuck lies from fear, and Mr. Roebuck lies from habit. Determine which lie is fatal. Fine, I said. But Cramer's not going to wait for poetry. Then he will bluster, Wolfe said, pouring beer instead of bourbon. As he always does. Let him. I left again, this time for the Roebuck offices after hours. The janitor had a key and an affection for bribes. Inside, the publisher's desk was neat enough to make a nun weep. I checked drawers, files, wastebaskets, routine archaeology. One locked drawer yielded to a trick I learned from a locksmith in Jersey City, a bent paperclip and bad intentions. Inside was a small envelope marked in Greaves's handwriting, proof number 1, confidential. Empty. But under it, a speck of green dust. I rubbed it between my fingers, soft, fibrous, damp-smelling. Wolfe's sphagnum moss. The kind he said clings to gloves. When I left, a shadow detached itself from the hallway wall. Busy night, Goodwin. Inspector Cramer again, red-faced and cigar in full growl mode. Always, I said. You follow me, or just like my aftershave? Cut it. You and Wolfe are playing games with evidence. I know about that glove. Then you know it doesn't fit me. Cramer jabbed the air with his cigar. You tell Wolfe this, if I find he's holding back one shred, I'll plant him and his orchids in the same pot. I grinned. You'd need a bigger greenhouse. He stomped off, muttering thunder. I waited until his echo died, then slipped out the side door. When I got home, Wolfe was exactly where I'd left him, seated, serene, and smug. I tossed the moss sample onto his desk. He examined it like a jeweler inspecting a fake diamond. Sphagnum, he said. From a cultivated strain used in orchid pots. And none but Roebuck's greenhouse would yield this mix. Then that makes our publisher part of the bouquet. Not necessarily. Moss adheres. It travels. It testifies. Meaning? Meaning, Archie, he said with that maddening calm, that whoever killed Greaves wore gloves. Gloves that handled orchids. And we now possess a murder weapons witness, one that cannot lie. He took a slow sip of beer. Tomorrow, we summon the players. This farce requires an audience. I nodded. You think you've got it all figured? I think, Wolfe said, the killer believes perfume can mask decay. That is always a mistake. He closed his eyes, the faint smile of a hunter who's already chosen the spot to spring his trap. I poured myself a drink, knowing what came next, an invitation, an audience, and a confession that would shake Madison Avenue out of its silk socks. Chapter 6, Alibis in Silk and Smoke. Morning at the brownstone began with the aroma of Fritz's coffee and the unmistakable sound of Nero Wolfe refusing the telephone. By the third ring, his patience evaporated. Archie, he bellowed. I answered. It was Inspector Cramer, his voice fried in cigar smoke and irritation. Tell that oversized encyclopedia I've had enough. I'm coming over. I hung up and relayed the message. Wolfe grimaced as if I'd offered him vinegar. If he insists on disturbing my digestion, he said, Fritz will bring a second breakfast. I'll need fortification. By the time Cramer arrived, Wolfe was seated behind his desk, motionless except for the delicate lift of a beer glass. Cramer entered like a marching band. I'm tired of your mystery games, Wolfe, he said. Greaves's killer is still out there, and all I've got is a photographer who died broke and an envelope that screams Nero Wolfe was here. Wolfe waved a finger. You exaggerate, Inspector. I left no mark. Cramer grunted. Then how do you explain this? He slapped a folder on the desk. Statements from Roebuck's wife, his assistant, his janitor, and that printer. Every one of them dances around the truth. If you've got something, spill it. Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair. Not yet. The stew requires more seasoning. Archie, recount what you have learned. I gave him the recap: Vivian Lake's double dealings, Roebuck's rooftop orchids, Celine's perfume, Croker's print, and the moss fibers that refused to keep secrets. Cramer listened, chewing on his cigar like it owed him money. When I finished, Wolfe said quietly, Inspector, you have 6 alibis, 1 genuine, 5 fabricated. Cramer leaned forward. And you can tell which is which? Wolfe smiled, which is something like watching a glacier crack. Naturally. After the inspector's exit, accompanied by enough muttering to melt steel, I hit the streets again. Wolfe's orders were simple: verify the alibis, shatter the false ones. First stop, Otis Pike, the superintendent at Greaves's building. He looked like he'd been pressed through a mop wringer. Evening Greaves got killed, where were you? I asked. In the basement, he said. Boiler trouble. Ask anyone. I did. Anyone didn't remember. Pike's timeline wobbled like a drunk on roller skates. Next was Alvin Croker, the printer. He was jittery enough to start fires with friction. I told you everything, he said. Maybe, I said. But you left out your little trip to Greaves's apartment. I never went near there. That's funny, I said, because a cabbie swears he dropped a man your size at that address half an hour before the murder. Croker's eyes widened. He's wrong. Maybe, I said, but you're worse at lying than you are at printing. He cracked just enough to spill. All right, I dropped something off. Greaves wanted a proof he'd left at the shop. I didn't even go inside. I swear. Proof of what? I didn't look. That made 2 men who hadn't looked at the same photograph. Interesting hobby. At Roebuck Publications, Vivian Lake was in her office, looking like she hadn't slept since integrity went out of style. She didn't flinch when I came in. You've been busy, Mr. Goodwin. So have you, I said. Running errands for the dead isn't standard assistant work. Her eyes hardened. I was trying to protect my employer. From what? A scandal or a murder charge? Both. She hesitated, then blurted, Celine went to Greaves's that night. I followed her. She said she only meant to buy the negative, but when I got there later, he was already dead. I panicked. I took the proof and paid Croker to destroy the print. That was the first straight confession I'd heard all week. So, you tampered with evidence. If you want to call it that. I do. But I also call it interesting. When I reported back, Wolfe listened, his eyes shut, head tilted slightly like a cat absorbing music. Archie, he said, you've confirmed what I suspected: loyalty is the murderer's camouflage. Miss Lake shields her employer, the wife shields her vanity, and Roebuck shields his reputation. Only one of them killed for convenience. Celine Roebuck, I said. Indeed. But proof must replace intuition. You will acquire her gloves. I frowned. How do you propose I do that? Burgle her closet? If necessary, Wolfe said calmly. The right pair will bear what I require: fibers of sphagnum and traces of printer's ink. Printer's ink? From the photograph, he said. Greaves developed his prints himself. The ink-dusted hairs, microscopic but distinct. Our killer handled the photograph before disposing of the body. That evening, I found myself back at the Roebuck residence, under the pretext of returning a misplaced document. Celine was entertaining two bridge partners who looked like they belonged in a perfume ad. I waited, smiled, and when her attention turned to her guests, slipped upstairs. Her dressing room smelled like verbena and money. In a drawer beside her vanity lay half a dozen gloves, suede, cream, and soft as gilt. One pair had faint green smudges near the wrists. I wrapped them in my handkerchief and left before conscience could object. Wolfe examined them under his magnifier like they were fragments of a holy relic. "Excellent," he murmured. "Moss, ink residue, and something else, a droplet of gelatin from photographic film emulsion." She carried the negative herself. "So, case closed?" He shook his head. "Not yet. I prefer the spectacle of truth delivered publicly. Tomorrow, we will have company." He leaned back, closing his eyes, already composing his orchestration of revelation. "Remind Fritz," he said drowsily, "to chill enough beer for 8. "Expecting guests?" I asked. "Expecting confessions," Wolfe said, and smiled, soft, certain, and dangerous. Chapter 7, The Gathering Storm. When Nero Wolfe decides to pull the curtain, the city might as well take notes. By the next afternoon, every moving part in this melodrama had been oiled into motion, phone calls made, invitations disguised as commands, and Fritz warned that dinner would be late and tempers would be earlier. At 6 o'clock sharp, the Brownstones' office looked like the set of a courtroom drama, heavy air, deep silence, and Wolfe sitting like a boulder behind his desk. The chairs had been arranged with military precision, 8 in all. I'd put them there myself, because I knew Wolfe liked the geometry of truth. Our guest list was illustrious and nervous. Brandon Roebuck, publisher, trying to pretend his pulse was as steady as his magazine circulation. Celine Roebuck, perfect posture, perfect lies, perfume heavy enough to commit perjury. Vivian Lake, coiled, pale, hands folded as if praying to a very expensive god. Alvin Croker, the printer, chain-smoking like an unpaid witness. Otis Pike, the superintendent, dragged in for atmosphere and protest. Inspector Cramer, red-faced and promising thunder. When the clock chimed 6:30, Wolfe cleared his throat, which, in our line of work, counts as a drumroll. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I detest melodrama, yet here we are. A man named Leon Greaves is dead. He attempted to extort money with a photograph, and someone silenced him to prevent exposure. The identity of that person is no longer in doubt." Cramer grunted, then stopped gassing and named M. "In due course," Wolfe said mildly. "Archie, lock the door." I did. The click was theatrical, which Wolfe appreciated. He continued, his voice low and deliberate. "Let us begin with the photograph. Greaves took it at a charity gala. It showed Mrs. Celine Roebuck and Mr. Mace Darrow in a compromising posture, enough to end a marriage, and worse, to expose the misappropriation of foundation funds routed through shell charities. Greaves demanded $5,000 to suppress it. Celine stiffened, but Wolfe's tone allowed no interruptions. Miss Vivian Lake, loyal assistant, sought to protect her employer and his wife. She arranged the drop. But the photo, by then, was already gone, from Greaves's possession to Mrs. Roebuck's handbag. Celine's voice, icy but steady, "That's absurd." "Is it?" Wolfe asked, leaning back. The glove found in Greaves's apartment bears moss from your greenhouse. Its mate rests in your vanity upstairs, with the same faint dusting of sphagnum. You were there twice that evening, first to negotiate, then to murder. Croker coughed. That's crazy. A lady like her. Spare us gallantry, Wolfe said. You, Mr. Croker, are an accessory after the fact. You printed the photograph, accepted cash, and later destroyed the proof at Miss Lake's request. What you did not destroy was the paper order slip, which carried a smudge of Mrs. Roebuck's perfume, verbena. Vivian looked down, guilt spilling across her face like ink. I thought I was helping. I didn't know she. I know, Wolfe said gently. You meant to save your employer's reputation. But you saved the wrong Roebuck. Cramer slapped his cigar into the ashtray. You've got one hell of a theory, Wolfe, but I need evidence. Of course. Wolfe gestured toward me. Archie, the brooch. I pulled it from my pocket, a silver swan pin that Celine had worn to that charity event. Found it in her dressing room drawer, I said. Hollow construction, hinged back. Wolfe continued, Mrs. Roebuck hid the negative inside this brooch. She believed it would be safest where no one would look, among trinkets of vanity. When Miss Lake confessed to visiting Greaves later, she did not realize the photograph was already gone. She found only death. The room went still enough to hear the radiator breathe. Celine's face didn't move, but her voice cracked just once. You have no proof I killed him. On the contrary, Wolfe said, I have 3 proofs. The moss on your glove, the film residue under your thumbnail, and your driver's log showing a stop on 49th Street at 7:32, the precise window of death. You told him it was to fetch your shawl. It was to fetch your silence. Cramer stood, pointing a thick finger. Mrs. Roebuck, you're coming with us. She rose slowly, the verbena scent sharp now, no longer pleasant, like perfume on old letters. You think you're clever, Mr. Wolfe. But you don't understand. People like us can't afford scandal. People like you, Wolfe said softly, can't afford conscience. Cramer led her out. Brandon followed, stunned into stillness. Vivian sat shaking, Croker exhaled relief, and Pike muttered something about minding his boiler. When they'd all gone, Wolfe looked at me and sighed. It is an ugly business, Archie. Murder seldom improves the decor. Neither do orchids, I said. But they keep you busy. He allowed himself a small smile. Bring me beer. Beer, confession, and justice, all in one sitting. You're consistent. I am, Wolfe said, leaning back. Consistency, Archie, is the highest form of genius. Chapter 8, The Final Reckoning. By dawn the next morning, the newspapers were having a feast. Society wife arrested in photographer's murder, screamed one headline. Publisher's empire shaken by scandal, whispered another. They all agreed on one thing, Nero Wolfe had solved it. They just couldn't decide whether to praise or condemn him. In the brownstone, the world was calmer. Fritz moved through the kitchen like a priest of routine, and Wolfe was back in his throne behind the desk, nurturing the peace that follows a storm. The orchids upstairs were due for watering, but he let them wait. I poured coffee and said, so, the lady cracks, the husband hides behind lawyers, and Cramer gets his collar. That about the size of it? Nearly, Wolfe murmured, eyes half-lidded. Mrs. Roebuck will not stand trial for long. Her counsel will negotiate. Wealth softens justice like heat softens wax. Still, I said, we turned over enough evidence to make her sweat. Indeed. And you, Archie, have earned your indulgence for at least a week. I'll frame that, I said. So tell me something. You had her pegged from the moment you smelled verbena, didn't you? He hesitated, a fraction, which for Wolfe is practically an admission. Scent, he said finally, is memory's accomplice. I had encountered that perfume before, at an orchid auction where Mrs. Roebuck bid on a rare Miltonia. The coincidence was too neat. You and your nose, I said. If you ever lose it, I'll get you a bloodhound. He ignored me and took a measured sip of beer. Motive, means, opportunity, the trifecta of guilt. She possessed all three. Vanity supplied the fourth, certainty that she could conceal it. She underestimated both the moss and your persistence. That's a first, I said. Usually, it's my charm that saves the day. You mistake consequence for cause, he said dryly. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Vivian Lake, hatless, pale, and very quiet. Mr. Wolfe, she said softly, I came to thank you. For what, Miss Lake? Wolfe asked without warmth. For ending it. Brandon's keeping me on, though the press is killing us. He says you saved the company. I saved no one, Wolfe said. I simply removed a rot before it spread. She looked down. I keep thinking about her, she whispered. About the moment she must have realized what she'd done. Spare your pity, Wolfe said. She murdered to preserve appearances. That is not tragedy, it is vanity unmasked. Vivian nodded, tears she refused to shed glinting in her eyes. Still, it feels awful to win this way. Wolfe sighed, his voice softer now. It often does. Justice, Miss Lake, is rarely elegant. She left soon after, her footsteps fading into the hum of the city. I watched her through the window until she vanished into traffic. Wolfe leaned back, folding his hands across his stomach. Another case concluded. You may type the report, Archie. I grinned. You're not even going to gloat? I never gloat, he said. I reflect. He reached for his book, Pliny again, or maybe Cicero, and I took that as dismissal. That night, I walked down to 9th Avenue for a steak and a drink. The city was doing what it always does after a scandal, pretending to forget. The streetlights glowed like they were in on the secret, and somewhere a cab driver cursed the world back into rhythm. I thought about Celine Roebuck, too proud, too clever, and finally too desperate. About Vivian, loyal to the wrong people for the right reasons. About Wolfe, sitting among his orchids, dissecting humanity the way a botanist studies rot. When I got back, he was still awake, reading. Archie, he said without looking up, did you enjoy your excursion? Sure, I said. I toasted your brilliance. Twice. He grunted. I prefer silence to praise. Good, I said, hanging up my hat. Because I was mostly toasting myself. That got me a glare, which is as close as Wolfe comes to affection. I sat at my desk, listening to the quiet hum of the brownstone. Cases close, people don't. Wolfe would file this one under orchids and foolishness, I'd file it under human nature. Outside, Manhattan went on pretending it had seen everything. Inside, Wolfe reached for his beer. And me? I started typing the final line of my report. Case closed, until the next knock on the door.